Welcome back! In this video, we will be analyzing the causes and events of the Cold War. From 1949 to 1991, there was diplomatic hostilities between the US and the Soviet Union. Both sides spied on each other, made propaganda against each other, and held secret operations to deal with each other. All of these actions and hostilities influenced the world. For example, there were several military actions taken to deal with third world countries. For example, the Vietnam War, Korea, and Afghanistan. With all of these hostilities came alliances. First, let's talk about NATO. NATO was formed in 1949 by 10 Western European countries, as well as the US and Canada. This alliance being the first peacetime alliance for the US. On the other side, the Warsaw Pact was formed. The Warsaw Pact was formed in 1955 and was the military alliance between the USSR and 7 Eastern European nations. The Warsaw Pact was mainly made in response to the formation of NATO, and while they both are similar, the Warsaw Pact had served as one of the Soviet Union's mechanisms for keeping the Eastern European alliances under political and military control. We then leave off at the SEATO, which was formed in 1955 to stabilize its area after military aggressions in Korea and Indochina after the Korean War. Now, with these big alliances, the hostilities and paranoia of attacks led to the forces developing nukes to use on each other if necessary, which made the nuclear threat. The US had the atomic bomb by 1945, with the USSR following in 1949. Next, Truman authorized the research of a thermonuclear weapon. This caused the formation of the HBomb, which uses fusion instead of fission. Fusion being the fusion of 2 or more lighter atoms into a larger one, fission being the splitting of a huge atom into multiple smaller ones, which would be about 1,000 times as powerful as the atomic bomb. This H-bomb was developed on October 31st, 1952. 2 ones that were tested being Mike and Ivy Mike. We then leave off the USSR attaining the H-bomb in 1953. Next, we move on to something called Brinksmanship, which is taking somebody to the brink of war and nothing happens. As president, Dwight Eisenhower appoints John Dulles as Secretary of State, in which John uses his power to state that the U.S. will retaliate instantly by means and places of their own choosing, if attacked. Next came the arms race, which was the systematic stockpiling of nuclear weapons, which leads to the public concern for safety. For example, there was a cartoon named Bert the Turtle in which it depicted a turtle covering itself from a nuclear bomb and tried to teach children what to do in case of a nuclear bomb explosion. We then move on to the Cuban Missile Crisis. In October of 1962, the USSR set up nukes in Cuba. The USSR wanted nukes in Cuba since they couldn't reach the US from the USSR, but they could from Cuba. The USSR sent an intermediate and mid-range missiles. Hearing about this, US President Kennedy warns the Soviets that if the silos aren't turned around, then they will attack the USSR. After 13 fearful days, the Soviet ships turned around, after which the US promised they wouldn't invade Cuba or use proxies to invade. And we end our story with the US removing the mid-ranged missiles from Turkey.